London 1812. Morning mist dissolved slowly over Mayfair's cobblestone streets, revealing imposing mansions whose Portland stone facades reflected the promise of a glorious day. Inside the Blackwood residence on prestigious Berkeley Square, Miss Eleanor Peaton contemplated her reflection in the oval mirror of her chamber with a mixture of resignation and melancholy no young woman should experience on the eve of her own engagement ball. At 22, Eleanor possessed a singular beauty that defied the conventional standards of Vieira. Her dark brown hair, inherited from her Welsh grandmother, fell in natural waves that no curling iron could completely tame. Her eyes, deep brown like amber, warmed by the sun, carried an intelligence that frequently disconcerted more traditional gentlemen. Her fair skin, dotted with discreet freckles her mother constantly suggested covering with rice powder, possessed a luminosity no cosmetic could replicate. "Miss Eleanor, we must finish pinning your hair," insisted Harriet, her lady's companion since childhood, holding an arsenal of pins and silk ribbons. "The modist will arrive within the hour for the final fitting of your gown, and your mother will be profoundly distressed if we aren't prepared." Eleanor sighed, turning from the window where she observed preparations in the garden below. Striped tents rose like mushrooms after a storm, while servants transported gilded chairs and tables covered with immaculate linen cloths. That night's ball would celebrate her official engagement to Viscount Richard Ashworth, an arrangement meticulously orchestrated between her father, a respectable but indebted baron, and the ambitious Ashworth family. "Harriet, do you believe it possible to love someone imposed upon us?" The older woman paused, pins suspended mid-air. "Love, my dear, often blooms where we least expect. Some marriages begin with passion and end in indifference. Others start with respect and grow into something deeper. But what if there's neither passion nor respect?" Eleanor pressed her voice a whisper laden with vulnerability. "What if there's only emptiness?" Harriet set down the pins and placed her hands on Eleanor's shoulders, meeting her eyes in the mirror's reflection. "Then, my dear, you find strength within yourself, as all women of our station always have." Before Eleanor could respond, authoritative knocking announced Lady Blackwood's arrival. Her mother entered in a whirl of sky-blue silk and maternal determination, her eyes sweeping over Eleanor with critical assessment. "Eleanor, darling, why aren't you properly dressed? The day advances rapidly, and we have 1,000 details to supervise." Lady Blackwood approached, adjusting a rebellious curl with impatient fingers. "This engagement is our family's salvation. You understand that, don't you?" "Yes, mother. Viscount Ashworth is an exceptional match, distinguished appearance, impeccable political connections, and that Surrey estate they say rivals the finest in the region." She paused, her gaze softening momentarily. "I know you have your reservations, dear, but you'll learn to appreciate him. That's how it works in our sphere." Eleanor bit her tongue, containing the words that threatened to overflow. How could she explain to her mother that her reservations went far beyond juvenile whims? That in the 6 months since the informal announcement of their engagement, Richard Ashworth had revealed himself to be vain, condescending, and profoundly disinterested in any aspect of her personality, not involving her appearance or doughy. Their conversations, when he deigned to have them, revolved exclusively around his own accomplishments, horses he'd acquired, wages he'd won, political discussions in which he'd participated in Parliament. When Eleanor dared mention her interest in literature, or the history books she devoured, he smiled with paternal indulgence and suggested she occupy her time with embroidery as befitted a future viscountess. "By the way," Lady Blackwood added, heading to the door, "Lady Ashworth mentioned that Richard is particularly eager to see you tonight. Apparently, he has a surprise planned." Her smile suggested she considered this a good omen. When the door closed behind her mother, Eleanor allowed herself to sink into the chair, her head heavy under the weight of expectations. Harriet resumed her work in silence, her skillful fingers transforming Eleanor's rebellious curls into an elaborate arrangement suitable for the occasion. The rest of the morning passed in frantic preparations. The modist arrived with the engagement gown, a dazzling confection in ivory satin with silver thread embroidery that captured light with every movement. Eleanor allowed them to dress, adjust and embellish her like a valuable doll, her mind wandering to distant places while her body remained obediently still. It was only in the early afternoon, during a brief moment of stolen solitude amid the chaos of preparations, that Eleanor found refuge in her father's library. The room, with its walls lined with leather-bound volumes and the comforting smell of aged paper and ink, had always been her sanctuary. She pulled a volume of Mary Wollstonecraft from the shelf, allowing the author's words to envelop her like a bomb. The ideas about women's rights and the importance of female education resonated deeply within Eleanor, who had always felt her own education had been neglected in favor of superficial accomplishments considered more appropriate for a lady. Hiding from the preparations, little sister, Eleanor startled, nearly dropping the book. Her brother William leaned against the doorframe, a sympathetic smile softening his aristocratic features. At 26, William was everything expected of an heir, responsible, well-educated, and deeply protective of his younger sister, merely seeking a moment of peace before the storm. You arrived earlier than expected. William entered the library, closing the door behind him. I wouldn't miss my sister's engagement ball. Eleanor, though every fiber of my being wishes to do so. Seeing her surprised expression, he continued, Don't look at me like that. Do you think I haven't noticed how unhappy you've been? Eleanor looked away, unable to sustain her brother's gentle scrutiny. My personal happiness is irrelevant. Father made it clear the family finances depend on this marriage. The gambling debts he accumulated, the failed investments, the Ashworth fortune is our only salvation. Damn the debts, William exploded, surprising her with his vehemence. You're my sister, not a sacrifice to be offered on the altar of financial convenience. He approached, taking her hands. Eleanor, if you truly cannot bear the idea of marrying Ashworth, I'll find a way. I'll sell my commission, mortgage my future inheritance. No, Eleanor interrupted firmly, squeezing his hands. You've worked too hard for your position in the regiment. I won't let you sacrifice your future for mine. She forced a smile. Besides, perhaps I'm being overly dramatic. Richard isn't cruel. He's simply distant. Perhaps with time we can develop some kind of mutual understanding. William studied her face, clearly dissatisfied, but respecting her decision. Very well. But promise me one thing, Eleanor. If Ashworth ever causes you true suffering, you'll come to me immediately. Understood, I promise. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. The butler announced that the first contingent of guests had begun to arrive. Time, that implacable tyrant, had exhausted her brief respite. The engagement ball at the Blackwood residence was, by all external standards, an absolute triumph. Candles and crystal chandeliers cast golden light over the assembly of elegantly dressed guests. The orchestra, positioned in the upper gallery, filled the ballroom with melodies that invited movement and animated conversation. Tables laden with delicacies, roasted pheasants, elaborate pies, crystallized fruits, and French champagne smuggled despite the Napoleonic blockade, demonstrated the host's generosity. Eleanor stood beside Richard Ashworth in the receiving line, greeting guests with rehearsed smiles and appropriate gratitude. Richard, devastatingly handsome in his midnight blue velvet coat and embroidered waistcoat, played the role of devoted fiancé with practiced perfection. His hand rested possessively on her waist, his smile radiating proprietary satisfaction. "You're particularly charming tonight, my dear," he murmured during a brief interval between greetings, his voice carrying that tone of condescension she'd learned to recognize. "The gown adequately enhances your figure. Thank you, my lord. Although," he continued, his eyes examining her critically, "those freckles are still quite pronounced. I must insist you apply more rice powder in future. A viscountess must present an impeccable appearance." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush, not with flattery but humiliation. Before she could formulate a response, the arrival of Lady Worthington, a formidable matron known for her sharp tongue and impeccable connections, demanded their attention. Miss Peaton, Lord Ashworth, Lady Worthington greeted them with a majestic nod of her plumed head. What a magnificent celebration! Though I must say, Lord Ashworth, you surprised society with your choice. Many expected you'd court Lady Sophia Beaumont. The comment, delivered with apparent innocence but unmistakable malice, hung in the air like acrid smoke. Eleanor felt Richard stiffened beside her. "Lady Sophia is certainly a charming young woman," Richard replied smoothly. "But Eleanor possesses qualities I find more valuable in a wife." Primarily, he added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Extremely useful family connections. The brutal frankness of the declaration, reducing her value to dowry and her father's commercial relations, cut Eleanor like a sharp blade. Lady Worthington raised her eyebrows, clearly delighting in the social gaffe, before excusing herself to seek champagne. "Richard, that was honest," he interrupted impatiently. "Frankly, Eleanor, you can't be so naive as to believe our marriage is based on foolish romantic sentiments. We're practical people making a practical arrangement. You gain a title and security. I gain access to your father's shipping operations and a pretty ornamental appendage for social events." The casual cruelty of his words left Eleanor momentarily speechless. She'd always known the marriage was arranged, but hearing her reduction to mere object of commercial transactions, stated so coldly, surrounded by hundreds of guests celebrating their supposed happy union, was a humiliation of an entirely different order. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging within. "I need a moment." Without waiting for his permission, Eleanor moved away, navigating through the crowd with a fixed smile that masked her inner turmoil. She greeted acquaintances automatically, her polite responses flowing without conscious thought, while she desperately sought an exit from the suffocating ballroom. She found temporary refuge on the terrace, where the night air offered relief from the oppressive heat and curious stares. London stretched before her, thousands of flickering lights punctuating the darkness like terrestrial stars. She gripped the stone balustrade, her knuckles widening with the force of her grip as she struggled to regain composure. "Forgive my intrusion, but you seem to be in considerable distress." The masculine voice, deep and laden with genuine concern, made Eleanor turn abruptly. A gentleman emerged from the terrace shadows, where he'd apparently been observing the city in solitary contemplation. Even in the diffuse light from the garden lanterns, his presence commanded attention. He was tall, built with the athletic frame of someone who practiced fencing regularly. Hair black as a raven's wing framed a face of severe beauty. High forehead, straight aristocratic nose, strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held attention. Deep blue like the ocean before a storm, laden with penetrating intelligence and something more, a depth of experience, suggesting intimate familiarity with suffering. Eleanor recognized him instantly, though they'd never been formally introduced. Nicholas Blackwood, Duke of Thornfield, was a legendary figure in London society. At 33, he'd become Duke tragically young after the premature deaths of his father and elder brother in a hunting accident. He'd inherited a duce in financial disarray, and through brilliant investments and progressive agrarian reform, transformed it into one of England's most prosperous estates. But it wasn't his fortune or title that made him an object of constant fascination. It was his deliberate reclusiveness. The Duke of Thornfield rarely attended social events, declined invitations to royal hunts, and most intriguingly, never demonstrated romantic interest in any of the numerous young women presented to him over the years. Rumors abounded about the reasons for his self-imposed solitude, from secret romantic tragedy to aristocratic misanthropy. "Your Grace," Eleanor hurried, making an awkward curtsy while quickly wiping any evidence of incipient tears. "Forgive me. I didn't realize anyone else was here. I should return to the please don't flee on my account," Nicholas interrupted gently, advancing into the light. "I seem to have developed a reputation as a social ogre, but I assure you, I don't bite." A slight smile softened his severe features, at least not without significant provocation. Despite everything, Eleanor felt an involuntary smile tug at her lips. "I don't believe you're an ogre. Your Grace, merely selective, diplomatically phrased," he acknowledged with approval. He approached the balustrade, maintaining respectful distance while gazing at the city. "I'm Nicholas Blackwood, though I suppose you already know that. And you're Miss Eleanor Peaton, the reason for tonight's celebration." "Formally, yes," Eleanor responded before she could censor herself, though celebration seems an overly generous term for what amounts to a public auction. Nicholas's eyes turned sharply to her, keen interest evident in his gaze. "Forgive my frankness, Miss Peaton, but that sounds remarkably like discontent with your impending engagement." Eleanor hesitated, torn between social decorum and desperate need for honesty with anyone who might understand. There was something in the Duke's presence, a quality of genuine attention free from the usual social judgment that invited candor. You've maintained your reputation for avoiding matrimony with admirable consistency. Your Grace, she said carefully, may I presume you understand the difference between chosen union and imposed? I understand very well, Nicholas replied, his voice taking on a darker tone. Though my reasons for avoiding the altar are considerably different from what I imagine yours are for wishing to escape it. And what are your reasons? Instead of taking offense at the impropriety of the question, Nicholas seemed to consider whether he should answer. Because I've witnessed firsthand how marriages based on obligation instead of genuine affection slowly destroy souls. My own parents existed in a state of polite civil war until their deaths, each profoundly miserable but unable to escape the social expectations that bound them together. He paused, his gaze distant with memory. I swore I'd never inflict such a fate on myself or another person. The raw honesty of his confession touched something deep within Eleanor. So you chose solitude. I chose autonomy, he corrected gently. There's a difference. Solitude implies lack. Autonomy suggests choice. What if someone has no choice? Nicholas turned to face her fully, those penetrating eyes seeming to see through carefully constructed social masks to the real woman beneath. Then he said deliberately, perhaps it becomes necessary to create choices where none seem to exist. Before Eleanor could question what he meant, the terrace door opened abruptly. Richard Ashworth emerged, his face twisted in barely disguised irritation. Eleanor, I've been searching everywhere, he said sharply, barely acknowledging the Duke's presence. It's extremely rude of you to abandon your own guests. People are asking. Lord Ashworth, Nicholas interrupted, his voice carrying the innate authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Miss Peaton was merely taking air. Ballrooms can become oppressively hot, as you surely recognize. Richard finally noticed the Duke, and his attitude shifted instantly from irritation to excessive flattery. Your Grace, what an extraordinary honor to have your presence tonight. I didn't realize you'd accepted our invitation. I found myself unexpectedly available, Nicholas replied coolly, his distaste for Richard's behavioral shift evident in his tone. And I'm immensely pleased I did, for I had the opportunity to make Miss Peaton's acquaintance, a young woman of remarkable intelligence and grace. The compliment delivered with calm sincerity that contrasted sharply with Richard's earlier condescending remarks made Eleanor blush genuinely for the first time that night. Richard, however, seemed vaguely troubled by the attention the Duke devoted to his fiancée. Yes, well, Eleanor possesses certain qualities I find adequate, though she still requires considerable refinement before being presented at court. The disdainful observation hung in the air like deliberate insult. Eleanor felt humiliation burn through her, not merely because of Richard's rudeness, but because she was being diminished before someone whose good opinion she suddenly very much desired. Nicholas's eyes narrowed dangerously. On the contrary, Lord Ashworth, I'd say it's Miss Peaton who demonstrates refinement by tolerating such ungracious behavior. A bride should be treated with reverence, not as an inferior possession requiring constant correction. Richard paused, recognizing the rebuke, but clearly uncertain how to respond to a Duke whose social position vastly exceeded his own. I certainly, Your Grace. I didn't mean to. Intention matters little when the impact is so clearly harmful, Nicholas continued implacably. He turned to Eleanor, his expression softening. Miss Peaton, may I have the honor of requesting the next dance? I believe the orchestra is starting a waltz. The question was more than mere social invitation. It was a lifeline offered to someone drowning. Eleanor grasped it gratefully. It would be my pleasure, Your Grace. Richard opened his mouth, probably to protest, but closed it again upon recognizing the futility of arguing with someone of Nicholas's position. He watched with sting impotence as the Duke of Thornfield offered his arm to Eleanor and led her back to the ballroom. The murmur that swept the ballroom when the Duke of Thornfield and the bride of the night entered together was almost audible. Conversations faltered, heads turned and ladies' fans fluttered with renewed energy as gossip began circulating at alarming speed. Nicholas seemed completely indifferent to the sensation they caused. He guided Eleanor to the dance floor with quiet confidence, positioning her with his hand at her waist while capturing her gloved hand in the other. When the music began, He led her through the waltz with practice grace, suggesting extensive training despite his reputation for avoiding such events. "You realize," Eleanor murmured, trying to ignore the weight of hundreds of eyes watching them, "we've just provided London society with enough gossip to last weeks." "Good," Nicholas replied tranquilly. "Let them talk. Perhaps the conversation will shift from you as victim of Ashworth's arrogance to you as a woman capable of capturing the attention of even the most reclusive of dukes." Eleanor looked up to find those deep blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "But it's not true, we've only just met. Truth," Nicholas said thoughtfully, "is often less important than perception in the social machinery, and if the perception we create tonight grants you some measure of respect your fiancé fails to provide, then I consider our subterfuge justified." The waltz continued, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in his arms, his leadership so confident she could almost forget the scrutiny of the crowd. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You don't know me. You have no obligation to intervene on my behalf." Nicholas was silent for several moments, his expression thoughtful. "My younger sister, Beatrice, finds herself in a position not dissimilar to yours, engaged to a baron who sees her as little more than heir producer and glorified housekeeper. I've watched her natural joy be gradually extinguished over the course of her engagement." His jaw tightened visibly. "I'm unable to alter Beatrix's circumstances without causing her greater social harm, but perhaps I can offer you, Miss Peaton, an alternative my sister doesn't possess." "What alternative?" "End your engagement with Ashworth," Nicholas said simply, as if discussing the weather. "Marry me instead." Eleanor stumbled, only Nicholas's quick reaction preventing her from falling completely. She stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. Forgive me. I thought you said I proposed marriage," he confirmed calmly, continuing to lead her through the waltz as if he hadn't just turned her world upside down. Though perhaps proposed is too generous a term for what was essentially a statement of intent. "But you don't know me," Eleanor repeated, her mind struggling to process the absurdity of the situation. "We've conversed for less than an hour. You avoid matrimony like the plague. This makes no sense whatsoever." "On the contrary, it makes perfect sense," Nicholas responded. "I've observed you throughout this evening, Miss Peaton. I've seen how you endured condescension and insult from a man who should feel grateful merely for your attention. I've witnessed your grace under pressure, your intelligence in our brief but revealing conversations, and your refusal to compromise your integrity, even when it would be easier to simply conform." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "I avoid matrimony because I refuse to enter into union based on falsehood and empty convenience. But marriage based on mutual respect and honest partnership, that's entirely different." "But this would still be arranged," Eleanor protested, even as her heart raced with the impossible possibility he presented, just with more honesty about the terms. "Exactly," Nicholas agreed. "We'd enter this with eyes completely open, both clearly understanding what we offer and receive. You gain a title, protection from a man who clearly doesn't value you appropriately, and freedom to pursue whatever interests you wish. I gain an intelligent wife capable of managing the social aspects of the duce I find tedious, and a partner who understands our arrangement doesn't require false displays of unfelt affection." The music was slowing, their waltz coming to an end. Helena knew she had seconds before they'd be separated by social obligations, before reality reasserted itself, and this surreal conversation ended. "You're completely serious?" "Completely," Nicholas confirmed. "I don't expect an immediate answer. What I propose is extraordinary and deserves careful consideration," but he added as the music ceased entirely, "I'll offer this final observation. In our brief conversation tonight, I've treated you with more genuine respect than your fiancé demonstrated publicly, in hours of celebration supposedly honoring you both. If that doesn't clearly indicate the difference between our characters, nothing will." He escorted her off the dance floor, bowing over her hand with impeccable formality. "I'll think of you with interest, Miss Peaton. Should you decide my proposal merits consideration, you may send word to my residence in Grosvenor Square. Until then, I wish you good night and my sincere congratulations on your engagement, whichever one you ultimately choose." With that, the Duke of Thornfield departed, leaving Eleanor standing in the middle of the ballroom, her mind spinning with the extraordinary proposal and the impossible choice now before her. The rest of the night passed in a surreal fog. Eleanor smiled, conversed, danced with other gentlemen, and accepted congratulations with mechanical grace, but her mind remained fixed on the Duke's proposal. Each time Richard appeared at her side, possessive, resentful of the attention Nicholas had granted her, the contrast between the two men became more glaring. It was around midnight, when guests finally began departing, that Eleanor found herself exhausted, not merely physically, but emotionally. She retreated to her chamber as soon as decorum permitted, dismissing Harriet with assurances she could prepare for sleep alone. Sitting before her dressing table, removing the elaborate pins from her hair, Eleanor studied her reflection. The same young woman who'd looked into that mirror this morning seemed fundamentally altered. In mere hours, everything she'd accepted as inevitable had suddenly become uncertain. Mary, the Duke of Thornfield. The idea was absurd, imprudent, completely irrational. They were strangers. He'd admitted frankly he didn't love her, that he never could. The marriage he proposed was transaction, not transformation. And yet he treated her with respect, spoken to her as an intellectual equal, not as a child needing guidance, offered her choice when everything in her life until that moment had been dictated by others. And there was something in his eyes, that depth of understanding born from personal suffering, suggesting he understood what it meant to be trapped by impossible expectations. A gentle knock on her door interrupted her reflections. "Come in," she called, expecting Harriet with some message from her mother. Instead, William entered, still dressed in his evening clothes, his expression serious. "We need to talk, Eleanor, about the Duke of Thornfield." Eleanor's heart sank. "You heard?" "The entire city heard, it seems," William replied, closing the door behind him. "Lady Worthington was kind enough to inform me that the Duke demonstrated extraordinary interest in you tonight. She, of course, speculated it was merely gentlemanly pity for Ashworth's deplorable treatment, but he paused, studying her face intently. "But I know you, little sister. Something more happened." Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. William had always been her most trusted ally. He asked me to marry him. To William's credit, he didn't collapse in dramatic shock or indignant outburst. Instead, he sank into the chair near the fireplace, processing this information with the careful deliberation that characterized his approach to all serious matters. Nicholas Blackwood, Duke of Thornfield, the man who's refused countless erases and avoided matrimony for a decade, asked for your hand in marriage after conversation of less than an hour. William rubbed his forehead. "Forgive me, but I must ask, are you certain you understood correctly? Perhaps he was merely expressing sympathy for your situation in an inadequately phrased manner." "He was perfectly clear," Eleanor assured. "He proposed matrimony based on mutual respect and honest partnership. No pretense of romantic affection, but genuine consideration for my wishes and autonomy." William was silent for a long moment. "And what did you answer?" "Nothing yet," Eleanor admitted. "He granted me time to consider." "But William," her voice broke slightly, "I can't proceed with the marriage to Richard. Tonight made that undeniably clear. He sees me as an accessory, something to be displayed and corrected at his convenience. The Duke, conversely, spoke to me as if my opinions mattered, as if I were a person of value beyond my doughy. Helena, you understand that breaking your engagement with Ashworth would cause enormous scandal," William pointed out gently, "especially to marry a man you've just met, regardless of how elevated his title. There would be accusations of impropriety, speculation about compromise of your virtue." "I know," Eleanor interrupted. "But William, what's the alternative? Marry a man who openly despises me, spend my life being criticized and diminished, become like mother. All vibrancy and joy slowly crushed under the weight of loveless marriage." The mention of their parents made William visibly flinch. He too had witnessed their unhappy union, the way their mother's spirit had withered over the years, until little remained beyond hollow obedience to social expectations. "If I support this," William said finally, "and help you escape the engagement with Ashworth, Father will never forgive me. The debts will remain. The family will face financial ruin. I know, Eleanor whispered miserably, and that's why I can't ask this of you. I'll proceed with the marriage to Richard, as was always the plan. The Duke, he was a kind aberration, a moment of fantasy before reality reasserted itself. Wait, William rose abruptly, beginning to pace the room. Just wait a moment. His expression shifted from concern to something more calculating. The Duke of Thornfield's fortune is reputedly vast, much greater than Ashworth's. William, we can't, Eleanor began, horrified by the implication. Not extortion, her brother interrupted quickly. But consider if the Duke is sincere in his proposal, surely he understands that breaking your existing engagement will cause financial complications for your family. A man of his caliber and resources wouldn't make such an offer without considering the practical consequences. Eleanor felt hope begin to awaken in her chest, quickly tempered by caution. You're suggesting I ask the Duke to settle father's debts as a condition of our marriage. William, that would make our arrangement as transactional as my engagement with Richard. No, William corrected. It would make it honest about its terms. The Duke himself said he prefers clarity to falsehood, didn't he? Very well then, be clear. If he wishes your hand, if he truly values your autonomy and well-being as he claims, then he'll understand you can't leave your family in ruin to pursue your own happiness. The argument had undeniable logic. Eleanor bit her lip, considering. What if he refuses? What if the entire proposal was a momentary impulse he already regrets? Then you'll have your answer about his true character, William said simply, and we'll find another way together. But Eleanor, he knelt before her, taking her hands, you deserve more than a life of silent desperation. If this Duke can offer something better, then it at least merits exploration. Eleanor squeezed her brother's hands, gratitude flooding through her. You'd help me. Even knowing father will be furious. Father created his own circumstances through reckless gambling and foolish investments, William replied, bitterness tinging his voice. It's not your responsibility to sacrifice your happiness for his mistakes. If he becomes angry, let his rage be directed at me. I can bear it. You shouldn't have to. Tears burned in Eleanor's eyes. Thank you. So, it's decided, William asked. You'll write to the Duke. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling the weight and freedom of the decision simultaneously. Yes, tomorrow I'll send a message to Grosvenor Square. William kissed her forehead gently. Then I suggest you rest. Tomorrow will be an extraordinary day, one way or another. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Eleanor, I saw the way Thornfield looked at you tonight. Perhaps it's not love, not yet, but it was respect, even admiration. That's a better foundation than most marriages in our sphere can claim. When the door closed behind William, Eleanor returned to the mirror. The young woman staring back seemed different now, not merely altered, but transformed. For the first time in her life, she was about to make a choice that was entirely her own. She slept little that night, her mind alternating between excitement and terror about what morning would bring. The letter arrived at the Duke of Thornfield's residence in Grosvenor Square mid-morning, delivered by discreet messenger, instructed to await a response. Nicholas was in his study reviewing reports from his various investments when his secretary announced the correspondence. He recognized the elegant handwriting, instantly feeling something tighten in his chest. Anticipation mixed with apprehension, he dismissed the secretary before breaking the seal, unfolding the parchment with care that bordered on reverence. Your Grace, your proposal last night left me in a state of considerable contemplation. That you offered an alternative when none seemed to exist is a generosity for which I am deeply grateful. That you did so based on brief observation of my character speaks to a perception I find remarkable. However, I must approach this question with complete honesty that you advocate. Breaking my existing engagement with Lord Ashworth would cause not merely social scandal, but severe financial consequences for my family. The debts that motivated the original arrangement remain, and my father possesses no means to settle them independently. If your proposal was genuine, if you truly desire partnership based on mutual respect and honest terms, then I must present conditions that may alter or even rescind your offer to marry you. I would need assurances that my family won't suffer financial ruin as a result. I ask this not from greed, but from responsibility to those who raised and loved me. I understand this makes our potential arrangement exactly the type of mercenary transaction you expressed desire to avoid. If you choose to withdraw your proposal based on this, I'll harbor no resentment. You gave me a glimpse of possibility I'll continue to treasure even if it remains unrealized. If, however, you consider my terms acceptable and wish to discuss details, I would receive you at Berkeley Square at 2 Geekshore this afternoon. My parents will be absent, a convenient circumstance given the delicate nature of our potential discussion. With sincere consideration, Eleanor Peyton Nicholas reread the letter 3 times, admiration growing with each reading. Where other women might have accepted his proposal with servile gratitude or rejected it entirely, Eleanor demonstrated precisely the quality he most admired: pragmatic honesty tempered by genuine consideration for others. She hadn't requested his financial intervention as an entitlement, but presented it as a practical reality he needed to consider. More importantly, she'd offered him a graceful exit, acknowledging that her conditions might make the arrangement unacceptable to him. But Eleanor didn't understand, or perhaps understood too well, that it was precisely this honesty that confirmed his decision from the previous night. She wasn't a foolish debutante seeking a wealthy duke to save her. She was an intelligent woman navigating an impossible situation with remarkable dignity and integrity. Nicholas pulled a fresh sheet of paper and took up his pen. His response was brief but unequivocal. "Miss Peyton, your conditions are not merely acceptable, but expected. A man who proposes matrimony without considering his bride's practical circumstances is either foolish or selfish. I strive to be neither. I will be at Berkeley Square precisely at 2's. Bring your brother if you wish. This discussion will impact your family, and he deserves to be present for assurances about my intentions. Incidentally, your frankness doesn't make our arrangement more mercenary, but rather more respectable. I prefer honesty about finances to false protestations of unfelt sentiments any day. Until this afternoon, Nicholas Blackwood, Duke of Thornfield." He sealed the letter, handing it to the waiting messenger with instructions for immediate delivery. Then he turned to his secretary, who'd waited discreetly in the corridor. "Schedule a meeting with my solicitor for first thing tomorrow morning," he instructed. "I'll need documentation prepared quickly. Marriage settlements, debt liquidations, fund transfers. Details will come after my appointment this afternoon." The secretary, a middle-aged man who'd served the Blackwood family for decades, allowed himself a rare expression of surprise. "Your Grace is planning to marry." "I am," Nicholas confirmed, feeling the weight and rightness of the decision. "Surprisingly, it seems I am." At precisely 2 gangs, Nicholas presented himself at the Blackwood residence in Berkeley Square. He was admitted by the butler and led not to the formal drawing room, but to a smaller study clearly used as a personal library. Eleanor waited there wearing a simple muslin dress in green that complemented her eyes, her hair arranged in a more casual style than the alaber from the previous night. At her side stood William Peyton, whose presence Nicholas appreciated. It showed Eleanor took the discussion seriously and wished a witness to protect both their reputations. "Your Grace," Eleanor greeted, curtsying gracefully. "Thank you for coming. You know my brother, Captain William Peyton." "Only by reputation," Nicholas replied, acknowledging William with a respectful nod. "I hear you distinguished yourself considerably in the peninsula." "You're kind to say so." "Your Grace," William responded cautiously. He was clearly assessing Nicholas, determining whether the Duke was genuine savior or a different kind of threat to his sister. "Let's dispense with formalities," Nicholas suggested, sitting only after Eleanor did. "I propose we address each other by given names, at least in private. If we're to marry, it seems absurd to maintain such ceremonial distance." "I agree," Eleanor said, though she blushed slightly using his name. "Nicholas, then you received my letter and understood the conditions." "I did," he confirmed. "Permit me to present my own position clearly so there are no misunderstandings." He paused, ensuring he had both their complete attention. "Your father's debts, as I understand from discreet inquiries I conducted last night, total approximately $45,000. A substantial sum, certainly, but well within my capacity to settle without significant financial strain. William Powell, $45,000. I knew it was bad, but not that bad. Your father has been quite skillful at concealing the full extent, Nicholas continued. Multiple creditors, some excessively impatient. Without union with the Ashworth fortune, the Blackwood estate would have been seized within 6 months, possibly less. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features. And you are willing to assume those debts? I am, Nicholas replied simply. With my own conditions, of course. Here it was, the moment when his own demands might make the entire arrangement crumble. Eleanor opened her eyes, meeting his gaze steadily. What conditions? First, Nicholas began, counting on his fingers. The settlement won't be treated as a gift to your father, but as part of our marriage agreements. The funds will pass through a trust ensuring he never again accumulates such debts. A reasonable allowance will be established, but his days of reckless gambling are finished. William nodded in approval. Sensible. Continue. Second, your father will sign documents ceding all future control of the Blackwood properties to you, Eleanor, under my guardianship until any children of our union reach majority. I won't trust your family's legacy to a man who nearly destroyed it through foolish decisions. Eleanor bit her lip. Father will never agree to this easily. He won't be given a choice, Nicholas said, not unkindly. The alternative is DTO's prison. Presented thus, I believe he'll see reason. And third, William prompted. Third, Nicholas turned his gaze fully on Eleanor, intensity in his eyes, making her feel as if they were alone in the study. Our marriage may begin as a pragmatic arrangement, but I insist on genuine mutual respect and honest partnership. I don't want a wife who fears me or who merely fulfills conjugal obligations out of duty. If we're to make this work, it must be with open communication and mutual autonomy within reasonable bounds. Reasonable bounds, Eleanor echoed, intrigued. I won't expect you to love me, Nicholas clarified, nor will I pretend sentiments I don't possess, but I will expect fidelity, discretion in matters affecting the Dusha, and public appearance of respectable union. In return, I'll offer the same, plus freedom to pursue whatever interests you wish, travel when possible, and genuine voice in decisions affecting our lives and properties. It was an extraordinary offer, more autonomy than most wives in her position could ever dream of possessing. Eleanor felt emotion tighten her throat. You're essentially offering me partnership instead of traditional marriage. I'm offering both, Nicholas corrected. Legal marriage with all its protection and commitment, but structured as partnership between equals instead of possession of woman by man. He leaned forward, expression earnest. Eleanor, I've witnessed enough miserable marriages to recognize that true compatibility doesn't require romantic love. It requires respect, honesty, and shared objectives. I believe we can build something genuinely good together, even without fairy tale passion. William observed the exchange with growing fascination. Your Grace, Nicholas, this is all extremely unorthodox. Unorthodox, Nicholas agreed, but honest. I prefer uncommon but genuine marriage to conventional but miserable union. He turned to Eleanor again. So, are my terms acceptable? Eleanor looked at William, who gave a slight nod. The decision was hers, but he'd support whatever choice she made. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Everything in her life had led to this point of choice. Acceptable, she replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to. With one addition of my own, Nicholas's eyebrows rose. Name it. I want an active role in administering your charitable properties. Eleanor said, I understand the Duke of Thornfield maintains several schools and hospitals for tenants. I wish to involve myself in those efforts, not merely as nominal patronist, but as active administrator, helping shape policies and programs. Genuine surprise crossed Nicholas's face, followed by something that might have been delight. Most women would ask for jewels or residences in Bath. You request work. I request purpose, Eleanor corrected. If I'm to be your Duchess, I wish to be useful, not merely decorative. Then we're in complete accord, Nicholas said, and for the first time since entering the study, he smiled. Not a polite social smile, but genuine expression of pleasure that transformed his entire face. Eleanor Petton, you are an extraordinary woman. William cleared his throat, so I presume we should discuss timeline. Breaking Eleanor's engagement with Ashworth will cause sufficient scandal. The more quickly we can present a respectable alternative, the better. Agreed. Nicholas nodded. I propose the following. Tonight, Eleanor will inform Lord Ashworth the engagement is ended. I'll be present for support if you wish, though I understand if you prefer to handle the matter privately. I want you present, Eleanor said immediately. The idea of facing Richard alone, of enduring his inevitable fury and contempt, was almost unbearable. Very well. Then tomorrow, my solicitor will begin preparing all necessary documentation, marriage settlements, debt liquidation, property transfers. Simultaneously, I'll make formal announcement of our intentions to the papers. The scandal will be intense initially, but my position will provide some protection. How long until we can marry? William asked pragmatically. Special license from the Archbishop can be obtained within a week. Perhaps less, given my position and contributions to the Church, Nicholas replied. I prefer private marriage in the chapel of my country estate in Sussex, rather than public spectacle in London. Less opportunity for disruption by those who may oppose the union. Eleanor felt the reality of the situation begin to solidify. Within days, her entire life would be transformed. This is extraordinarily fast. Speed serves multiple purposes, Nicholas explained. It minimizes the period during which you're vulnerable to social pressure to reconsider. It demonstrates seriousness of my intentions. And frankly, he added with characteristic pragmatism, the longer the engagement, the greater opportunity for complications to arise. William stood, offering his hand to Nicholas. Then it seems I have a new brother-in-law in prospect. I should warn you, Duke, that if you cause my sister a moment of unnecessary suffering, title and fortune won't protect you from my response. Nicholas rose, clasping William's hand firmly. Fair warning and appreciated. I can offer similar assurance of my intentions. Eleanor deserves respect and consideration. Any failure to provide them will be mine, not hers. Eleanor watched the exchange between the two men with emotion tightening her chest. After years of passively accepting what others decided for her, she was finally taking control of her own destiny. There was terror in it, certainly, but also thrilling possibility. Nicholas turned to her, extending his hand. So, we agreed. You'll become my Duchess under the terms we've discussed. Eleanor placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. We're agreed, she confirmed. Though I must admit I'm still somewhat stunned by the rapidity of everything. As am I, Nicholas admitted, a touch of humor softening his usually serious expression. 24 hours ago, I was prepared for another decade of determined celibacy. Now I find myself eagerly anticipating matrimony. Life is replete with remarkable surprises. Speaking of surprises, William interjected, clearly reluctant to ruin the moment but feeling obligated to address the matter. How exactly do we plan to explain this to our parents, especially considering they still believe Eleanor is happily engaged to Ashworth? Eleanor palled in her focus on the practical details of the arrangement with Nicholas. She'd momentarily forgotten that her parents would return from their social obligations within hours, expecting to find her still devoted to Richard Ashworth. Well, face that together, Nicholas said firmly, clearly recognizing her growing anxiety. With your permission, I'll remain here this afternoon. When your parents return, we'll present the situation as fate comply. Less opportunity for prolonged argument. My father will be furious, Eleanor warned. Regardless of resolution of his debts, seeing his daughter break an advantageous engagement will wound his pride. Your father will forfeit the right to indignation when he signs documents acknowledging he nearly drove the family to ruin through reckless gambling, Nicholas responded, an edge entering his voice. Should he choose to argue, I'll take satisfaction in reminding him of that fact. William laughed abruptly. Oh, I'm going to thoroughly enjoy witnessing that conversation. Father rarely encounters anyone willing to confront him directly. So it was decided Nicholas would remain at the Blackwood residence awaiting the parents' return. Meanwhile, Eleanor would have a few precious hours to prepare for the confrontation that would surely come. But first, there was the matter of Richard Ashworth. This Count Ashworth presented himself at Berkeley Square at Sixmorn that evening, as was his habit on nights when he had no prior social commitments. He expected to find Eleanor alone in the drawing-room, perhaps with her mother embroidering discreetly in the corner, the established routine of their engagement. Instead, he was led to the study, where he found not only Eleanor, but also William, and a gentleman he recognized with growing shock as the Duke of Thornfield. Ashworth, Nicholas greeted coolly, not rising, a calculated slight that immediately established the social hierarchy of the encounter. "Your Grace," Richard replied, confusion and irritation mingling in his expression. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Eleanor," he turned to her, attempting to reassure some measure of control. "What's going on? Why is there need for this formal audience?" Eleanor stood gathering her courage. Throughout the afternoon, she practiced the words mentally hundreds of times. Now, facing the reality of Richard before her, she found her voice surprisingly steady. "Richard, our engagement is ended. I'm breaking our arrangement." Effective immediately, absolute silence followed her pronouncement. Richard stared at her as if she just announced her intention to fly to the moon. "You're what?" he finally managed. "Eleanor, this is absurd. You can't simply break our engagement. Agreements were signed, announcements were made. Half of London celebrated our union just last night. And yet, it's exactly what she's doing." Nicholas intervened calmly. "And I'd suggest you accept the decision graciously, Ashworth." Richard whirled on him, incredulous giving way to furious comprehension. This is your doing, isn't it? One waltz, one conversation on the terrace, and you thought you could simply steal my bride." "No one stole anyone," Eleanor said firmly, refusing to be reduced to a trophy disputed between two men. "I made a decision based on simple, indisputable observations. You don't respect me, Richard. You never have. You treat me as inadequate possession requiring constant correction, not as valued partner." "This is ridiculous," Richard spat. "I offered you everything: title, position, security. What more could you possibly want?" "Basic consideration," William suggested dryly. "Common kindness. The courtesy of not insulting her publicly at her own engagement ball." Richard ignored him completely, focusing his growing fury on Eleanor. "You understand what you're throwing away. My family won't tolerate this humiliation. I'll ensure you're socially ruined that no decent man will ever consider courting you." "Empty threats," Nicholas said, voiced dangerously low. "For you see, Ashworth, Miss Peaton is already committed to me." The declaration fell like a bomb in the silent study. Richard pulled, then flushed furiously. "This is impossible. You've only just met. You must have deliberately compromised her, seduced her away from me." "Watch your tongue," William warned, taking a threatening step toward Richard. "Questioning my sister's virtue will require satisfaction." "Peace, Captain Peaton," Nicholas raised his hand calmly. "There's no need to duel a man so obviously at a disadvantage." He returned his gaze to Richard, full ducal authority radiating from every line of his bearing. "As for seduction or compromise, I assure you, nothing improper occurred. I simply recognized what you, in your arrogance, failed to perceive, that Eleanor Peaton is an extraordinary woman, deserving far better treatment than the contemptible disdain you offered." "You can't do this," Richard insisted, desperation beginning to infiltrate his anger. "The financial arrangements, the commercial connections with her father, everything was established. My family invested substantial resources based on this union. Your investments will be reimbursed in full," Nicholas said coldly. "My solicitor will contact you tomorrow with appropriate documentation. You'll suffer no financial loss of any kind." He paused, letting the weight of his next word settle. "Unless, of course, you choose to contest this publicly. In that case, I'd feel compelled to share certain observations about your treatment of Eleanor that wouldn't reflect favorably on your character." It was a veiled but unmistakable threat. Richard recognized the futility of further argument. Facing a duke whose social position vastly exceeded his own, with the bride herself unequivocally declaring her desire to break the engagement, he had no ground on which to stand. "You'll regret this, Eleanor," he said finally, voice trembling with contained fury, "when you discover the great Duke of Thornfield isn't the savior you imagine him to be. When your novelty fades and he seeks entertainment elsewhere, you'll understand the error you've made." "I think not," Eleanor replied calmly, surprised by the tranquility she felt. "Because unlike you, Richard, Nicholas has offered me honesty from the beginning. There are no illusions between us, no false promises, just mutual respect and clear agreement. That's more than you ever gave me. Richard looked from Eleanor to Nicholas, then to William, seeking some crack in their united front. Finding none, he turned abruptly toward the door. Very well. May you have happiness with your precipitous union. When it ends in disaster, and it will, don't expect sympathy from me or anyone in my circle. We won't, Nicholas said coldly. I request you don't return to this residence. When the door closed behind Richard with considerable force, Eleanor felt the tension she'd been holding in her shoulders begin to ease. It was done. There was no going back now. Well, William said after a moment of silence that was considerably less dramatic than I feared, I thought he might challenge Nicholas to a duel. Ashworth isn't fool enough to challenge a duke to a duel over a woman who clearly no longer wishes to marry him, Nicholas observed. It would be social humiliation beyond the personal. He turned to Eleanor, expression softening. Are you well? I know that couldn't have been easy facing him. I'm fine, Eleanor assured, surprising herself by discovering it was true. Actually, I'm better than fine. For the first time in months, I feel I can breathe properly. Their moment of camaraderie was interrupted by the butler's arrival, announcing that Lord and Lady Blackwood had returned and wished to see Eleanor immediately in the formal drawing-room. Here we go, William murmured. Prepare for the storm. Lord Blackwood, a corpulent middle-aged man whose face bore the marks of decades of excess, rose abruptly when Eleanor entered the room with Nicholas and William. Lady Blackwood remained seated, but her alarmed expression suggested she'd already guessed something was terribly wrong. Eleanor, what is this? Lord Blackwood demanded. The butler mentioned Lord Ashworth departed in considerable fury, and now you appear with the Duke of Thornfield as if. He paused, processing the scene before him with growing comprehension. Eleanor, what have you done? I've broken my engagement with Richard Ashworth, Eleanor declared, forcing herself to meet her father's gaze directly. I'm going to marry the Duke of Thornfield instead. Lady Blackwood let out a small cry of shock. Lord Blackwood simply stared, his face passing through a series of colours, pale, then red, then nearly purple. You did what? He finally roared. Foolish girl. Do you understand what you've done? The arrangement with Ashworth was our salvation. Without that union, we're ruined. Not exactly, my lord. Nicholas intervened calmly, stepping forward. If you'll permit me to explain the situation. And who the devil asked for your opinion? Lord Blackwood turned his fury on Nicholas. This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere, father, Eleanor exclaimed, horrified by the rudeness. But Nicholas simply raised his hand reassuringly, completely unperturbed by the outburst. On the contrary, my lord, I have every right. As Eleanor's future husband, your family's matters become mine. And as a man with considerable means to settle your debts, I suggest you moderate your tone and listen to what I have to propose. Lord Blackwood opened his mouth, then closed it again, the meaning of Nicholas's words slowly penetrating. Settle my debts, he repeated cautiously. All of them, Nicholas confirmed. For $45,000 according to my information. A considerable sum, certainly, but manageable. In exchange, you'll sign documentation ceding control of the Blackwood properties to Eleanor under my guardianship and accept a structured allowance that will prevent future accumulation of such debts. You can't simply... This is absolutely, Lord Blackwood sputtered, torn between relief at financial salvation and indignation at loss of control. It's extraordinarily generous, Lady Blackwood interjected softly, meeting Eleanor's eyes with a complex expression mixing surprise, maternal concern, and something that might have been respect. Your Grace, you're truly willing to assume my husband's obligations as part of the marriage settlement. I am, Nicholas confirmed. Eleanor shouldn't suffer for her father's mistakes, nor should she be forced into marriage with a man who clearly doesn't value her appropriately, merely to save her family from the consequences of reckless gambling. The direct criticism was a calculated insult, and Lord Blackwood flushed furiously. How dare you? How dare I? Nicholas echoed, voice taking on an edge of steel. I dare because, unlike you, my lord, I value Eleanor for what she is, an intelligent and capable woman deserving respect and consideration, not as a bargaining chip to be traded to cover debts you created through irresponsible behavior. William made a strangled sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Eleanor simply watched, fascinated and slightly terrified as Nicholas systematically dismantled her father's objections. "Now," Nicholas continued, "you have a simple choice, Lord Blackwood. Accept my terms. Complete debt settlement in exchange for responsible control of the properties and blessing of our marriage, or refuse and face debtor's prison when your creditors lose patience. Which will it be?" The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Blackwood looked from Nicholas to Eleanor, clearly seeking some escape, some way to maintain both financial salvation and patriarchal authority. Finding none, he finally collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking much older and defeated. "Very well," he mumbled. "I accept your terms." "Excellent," Nicholas said, triumph in his voice perfectly contained. "My solicitor will prepare all necessary documentation. I expect you'll be available to sign the papers tomorrow afternoon." Lady Blackwood rose, approaching Eleanor with strangely touching hesitation. "My dear, are you certain of this? I know Lord Ashworth wasn't ideal, but marriage to a stranger, even a duke, is an extraordinary step." "I'm certain, Mother," Eleanor replied gently. "Nicholas has offered me choice and respect. That's more than Richard ever did." "Then you have my blessing," Lady Blackwood said quietly, surprising everyone in the drawing room. She turned to her husband. "And you'll give yours as well, Henry. Our daughter has found a man willing to save her, not merely financially, but from a marriage that would have made her miserable. The least we can do is support her." Lord Blackwood grumbled something that might have been agreement. He clearly recognized that further opposition would be futile, when both his wife and son obviously supported Eleanor's decision. "As for timing," Nicholas continued, moving to practical details, "I propose marriage within a week. Special license has already been requested. The ceremony will occur at my country estate in Sussex, only with immediate family present." "A week," Lady Blackwood repeated faintly. "But Your Grace, that's barely time to prepare anything appropriate. The wedding gown alone." "Eleanor will wear whatever she wishes," Nicholas said firmly. "This marriage is about union of two people, not social display. The simpler and more private, the better." Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude for his understanding. The idea of another public spectacle, like the disastrous engagement ball, was almost unbearable. "Then it's decided," William declared, clearly satisfied with the outcome. "Eleanor will marry Nicholas within a week. Meanwhile, I presume the announcement will appear in the papers tomorrow." "Yes," Nicholas confirmed. "The Times, the Morning Chronicle, and the major society papers. Better to control the narrative from the beginning." "There will be scandal," Lady Blackwood warned. "Maternal concern resurfacing. People will talk, make terrible speculations." "Let them talk," Eleanor said, surprising herself with her own courage. "I prefer temporary scandal to a permanent life of misery." Nicholas smiled at her, expression carrying approval that warmed something deep within her. "Well said. And anyone foolish enough to spread malicious rumors will discover the Duke of Thornfield protects what is his." The possessive pronoun should have felt possessive, even threatening. Instead, Eleanor found it strangely comforting. For the first time in her life, she had a powerful ally, someone willing to stand between her and the world's cruelties. The rest of the evening passed in a whirl of details. Discussions about legal documentation, travel preparations for Sussex, messages to be sent to extended family members. When Nicholas finally departed near midnight, leaving to organize the multiple necessary arrangements, Eleanor felt complete exhaustion. But it was satisfying exhaustion, the kind that comes from decisive action instead of passive resignation. She'd changed the course of her own life, taken control of her destiny in ways she'd never imagined possible. Eleanor. William found her in the library, where she'd sought a moment of solitude after Nicholas's departure. "How are you?" "Honestly, I'm not certain," Eleanor admitted, sinking into a familiar chair. "Everything has happened so quickly. 24 hours ago, I was resigned to marrying Richard. Now, I'm engaged to a duke I barely know." William sat across from her, expression serious. "Do you have doubts? Because if you do, it's still not too late. Nicholas seems a man of honor. If you changed your mind, I believe he'd understand." Eleanor considered the question carefully. Did she have doubts? Certainly. Fear of the unknown, anxiety about marrying an essential stranger, worries about whether she could adequately fulfill the role of Duchess, all of it swirled through her mind. But above everything was a fundamental certainty. Whatever the future held with Nicholas, it would be better than the life of silent desperation awaiting her with Richard. "I don't have enough doubts to reconsider," she said finally. "Nicholas has treated me with more respect in 2 days than Richard demonstrated in 6 months. That must mean something. It means everything," William agreed. "And for what it's worth, I entirely approve. Thornfield is a man of substance and integrity. You could do much worse." Eleanor smiled slightly. "Moderate praise indeed." "Very well, then let me be less moderate," William corrected with a smile. "I believe you and Nicholas may be remarkably well suited once you overcome the initial awkwardness. You both possess considerable intelligence. You both value honesty above social artifice. And you've both clearly been wounded by externally imposed expectations." He paused. "Perhaps, just perhaps, you might heal those wounds together." The possibility hung in the air between them, tempting and terrifying simultaneously. Could a marriage based on pragmatism grow into something deeper? Could mutual respect blossom into genuine affection? Eleanor didn't know, but for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. The following week passed in a blur of activity. As Nicholas predicted, the announcement of their engagement appeared in the morning papers and sent shockwaves through London society. A Viscountess's bride broke her commitment to marry a reclusive duke. Drawing rooms see it with speculation. Some whispered Eleanor must have deliberately compromised herself to capture Thornfield. Others insinuated the Duke, in his loneliness, had become excessively susceptible to seduction by a pretty young woman. The most malicious suggested both were using each other, Eleanor for title and fortune, Nicholas for reasons that remained sinisterly vague. Eleanor endured the gossip with surprising grace, largely because Nicholas kept his word about protection. When Lady Worthington attempted to interrogate her at an unfortunate encounter at the modists, Eleanor simply smiled and redirected the conversation. When old acquaintances crossed to the other side of the street to avoid her, she raised her chin and continued walking. Nicholas, for his part, became a constant presence at Berkeley Square. He came daily, sometimes to discuss practical details of their imminent marriage, but often simply to converse. It was during these conversations that Eleanor began to glimpse the man behind the ducal title. Nicholas proved surprisingly well-read, with particular interest in political philosophy and economic theory. He solicited Eleanor's opinions on various topics: agrarian reform, education of tenants' children, even the growing role of women in commercial enterprises, and genuinely seemed to value her insights. "You realize," Eleanor observed during one such discussion, "most men would consider female opinions on such matters completely worthless." "Most men," Nicholas replied dryly, "are fools who waste half of humanity's intellectual potential due to senseless prejudice. I prefer not to be among their number." It was moments like these that gave Eleanor hope William was right, that she and Nicholas could truly form a partnership of substance. There were also moments of tension, of course. When Nicholas's solicitor presented the marriage settlements for review, Eleanor was shocked by the generosity of the terms. Beyond her substantial doughy and more than generous allowance, she would be granted uncommon control over personal property and legal voice in decisions involving the Thornfield estates. "This is extraordinary," she said, examining the documents. "Most men would never grant a wife such autonomy." "You're not most women," Nicholas replied simply, "and ours won't be most marriages." The terms reflect that. But when it came to the question of conjugal duty, the expectation of heirs every aristocratic marriage carried, both became visibly uncomfortable. "We must discuss this," Nicholas said finally, forcing himself to address the delicate topic. "I understand the physical aspect of matrimony can be challenging, especially given how quickly we've arrived at this arrangement." Eleanor blushed furiously, but forced herself to meet his gaze. "I understand my duty, if that's what you're asking. Continuation of your line requires heirs." "Duty," Nicholas repeated, some indefinable emotion crossing his face. "Yes, I suppose it is. But Eleanor, I want you to know I won't pressure you. When and if such intimacy occurs, It will be because we're both comfortable, not because marital obligation demands it. The consideration in his words touched Eleanor deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "For understanding this aspect of marriage may require adjustment." "We have time," Nicholas assured. "No rush, no unreasonable expectations, just mutual honesty about what each of us is ready to give." It was a strange conversation, pragmatic to the point of seeming cold. Yet for Eleanor, it offered immense comfort. Nicholas didn't see her body as property to be claimed on the wedding night, but as an aspect of partnership to be navigated with communication and respect. How many brides could claim the same? Finally, a week after their whirlwind engagement, the wedding day arrived. Eleanor travelled to Sussex with her family in Nicholas's carriage, watching the London landscape gradually yield to open countryside. The Thornfield estate in Sussex proved as impressive as expected. Vast expanse of rolling terrain, punctuated by ancient forests, with a palatial mansion rising like a crown of stone at the centre. But it was the chapel that captured Eleanor's attention, a small ancient stone structure wrapped in ivy. It occupied a gentle hill overlooking the gardens below. There was an intimacy to it no grand London ceremony could match. "It was built in the 12th century, Nicholas explained, appearing at her side as she contemplated the building. "Every Duke of Thornfield for 12 generations has married within these walls. I hope you don't find it too primitive." "It's perfect," Eleanor said honestly, marveling at the history contained in that ancient stone, much better than a public spectacle. The ceremony itself was simple to the point of austerity. Only immediate family present, Eleanor's parents clearly still processing the dramatic change of circumstances, William radiating silent approval, and Nicholas's sister, Lady Beatrice, who embraced Eleanor with surprising warmth, considering they were virtual strangers. The local priest conducted the service with appropriate dignity. Eleanor, wearing a simple cream silk dress that had belonged to Nicholas's mother, stood beside her groom and spoke the vows binding her to him for life. "I, Eleanor Margaret Peaton, take you, Nicholas James Blackwood, to be my lawful husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Nicholas's voice, when he spoke his own vows, was steady, carrying weight of commitment extending beyond mere ritual words. "I, Nicholas James Blackwood, take you, Eleanor Margaret Peaton, to be my lawful wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." When the priest declared them husband and wife, when Nicholas leaned in to seal their union with a chastened kiss, Eleanor felt the weight and strangeness of the moment in equal measure. She was now Duchess of Thornfield, bound to this man who'd been a stranger mere days ago. Yet, as they turned to face their families as a married couple, as she saw quiet approval in Nicholas's eyes, and felt the steady support of his hand under hers, Eleanor allowed herself a small spark of optimism. Perhaps William was right. Perhaps respect could grow into affection. Perhaps honesty could build a foundation for something genuine. Only time would reveal. The wedding breakfast was, like everything else in the ceremony, remarkably simple compared to usual aristocratic standards. A long table established in Thornfield Manor's great hall accommodated the small group comfortably. The food was excellent. Roasted pheasant, fresh salmon, vegetables from the estate garden, but without the ostentatious extravagance characterizing typical London wedding banquets. Eleanor sat beside Nicholas at the head of the table, acutely conscious of the gold ring now adorning her finger. It was a simple circle engraved internally with Latin words Nicholas had translated for her. Videos, faith, and truth. "Appropriate," she'd murmured when he slid it on her finger during the ceremony. For a marriage based on honesty. Now watching their families interact, William engaged in animated conversation with Beatrice, her parents behaving with uncommon decorum under Nicholas's watchful. Eleanor felt the complete surrealism of her situation. 8 days ago, she'd been miserably resigned to life as Viscountess Ashworth. Now she was Duchess of Thornfield, married to a man who was essentially a stranger despite the vows they just exchanged. "You're quiet," Nicholas observed softly, leaning in so only she could hear. "Regrets already?" "No regrets," Eleanor replied honestly. just absorbing how drastically my life has changed in so little time." "Understandable," Nicholas agreed. "I recognize I pressed this with indecorous speed. If you need time to adjust to feel comfortable in your new position, time would be appreciated," Eleanor admitted, grateful for his understanding. "Though I must confess part of me can hardly wait to begin. You mentioned I could involve myself with the Duce schools and hospitals." Genuine pleasure crossed Nicholas's face. "Indeed. In fact, I thought you might start as early as this week if you wish. The local village school desperately needs renovation, and the current teacher, Miss Hartley, has expressed interest in expanding the curriculum beyond basic reading and sewing." "Expanding how?" Eleanor asked. Interest piqued. "Mathematics, geography, perhaps even some elementary science," Nicholas explained. "Radical concepts for a village school, certainly, but I believe even tenants' children deserve from local conservatives." Eleanor felt excitement grow within her chest. Here was purpose, meaningful work extending beyond decorative social obligations. "I would love that," she said eagerly. "When could I meet Miss Hartley?" "Tomorrow, if you wish," Nicholas responded, his expression warming with her enthusiasm. "Though perhaps you deserve at least one day to settle into your new home before diving into duchy business." "Nonsense," Eleanor declared. "Idleness has never suited me. The sooner I begin, the better." Nicholas reached across the table, covering her hand with his, in an unexpected gesture of affection that made her breath catch. "I believe, Eleanor, I may have made the wisest decision of my life in marrying you." The sincerity in his voice, the warmth in those storm-blue eyes, stirred something deep within Eleanor's heart. Perhaps this marriage of convenience could indeed become something deeper than either had anticipated. As the wedding breakfast concluded, and their families began to depart, William with promises to visit within the month, her parents with visible relief at their financial salvation, Eleanor found herself alone with Nicholas in Thornfield Manor's grand entrance hall. "Should I show you your apartments?" Nicholas asked, suddenly formal again, as if uncertain how to proceed now that they were truly alone as husband and wife. "That would be much appreciated," Eleanor replied, equally uncertain. He led her through corridors, lined with portraits of previous dukes and duchesses of Thornfield, each face seeming to watch their passage with varying degrees of approval or judgment. Finally they stopped before an ornate door of carved oak. "These are the Duchess's apartments," Nicholas explained, opening the door to reveal a suite of rooms decorated in soft blues and creams. Sunlight poured through tall windows overlooking the gardens, and fresh flowers perfumed the air. "They connect to my own apartments through that door." He indicated a connecting entrance, though it remains locked unless you wish otherwise. The consideration touched Eleanor deeply. "Thank you, Nicholas, for everything. For saving me from a miserable fate. For treating me with such respect and kindness." "You needn't thank me," he said softly, taking a step closer. "If anything, I should thank you for agreeing to this arrangement, for trusting a near stranger with your future." They stood mere inches apart, the air between them charged with something neither could fully name. For a moment Eleanor thought he might kiss her, truly kiss her, not the chaste ceremonial touch of lips that sealed their vows. But Nicholas merely raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Rest well, Eleanor. Tomorrow begins our new life together." When he left, closing the door softly behind him, Eleanor sank onto the luxurious bed, her mind swirling with the extraordinary events of the past week. She'd gone from resigned despair to cautious hope, from unwanted bride of a vain viscount to respected duchess of a remarkable man. As she prepared for sleep that night, aided by her new lady's companion, Eleanor caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back seemed different somehow, more alive, more present, more herself than she'd been in years. Perhaps she thought as sleep finally claimed her, this unexpected marriage would prove not merely an escape from one fate, but a journey towards something far more precious, genuine happiness, true partnership, and possibly even love. 6 months later, winter had settled over Sussex with tranquil grace, enveloping Thornfield Manor in a mantle of pristine snow. In the renovated village school, Eleanor stood before a group of eager students, their faces illuminated with curiosity as she demonstrated a simple scientific experiment with water and ice. "You see," she explained, "when water freezes, it actually expands. That's why ice floats instead of sinking." The children gasped in wonder, and Eleanor felt that familiar surge of satisfaction that came from nurturing young minds. Miss Hartley, observing from the corner, radiated approval. As the lesson concluded, and the children bundled into their winter coats, Nicholas appeared in the doorway, snow dusting his dark hair. Eleanor's heart performed its now familiar leap at the sight of him, a reaction that had grown stronger with each passing day of their marriage. "Ready to return home, Duchess?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready, Your Grace," she replied with a smile that spoke of private jokes and growing intimacy. In the carriage returning to the manor, Nicholas pulled her close against the cold. "I received a letter from William today," he mentioned. "He writes that Richard Ashworth has left London entirely, retired to his family's surrate. I can't bring myself to feel satisfaction in his misery," Eleanor admitted, "though I'm profoundly grateful not to be sharing it as his wife." "As am I," Nicholas said, his arm tightening around her. "Eleanor, there's something I must tell you. Something I've been trying to find the courage to say for weeks." She looked up at him, heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" "When I proposed to you that night at your engagement ball, I believed I was offering a practical arrangement. Nothing more. A partnership of convenience and mutual respect." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I was wrong. Or perhaps I was lying to myself even then." "Nicholas, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. Your intelligence, your compassion, your fierce dedication to improving our tenants' lives, Eleanor, you've completely captured my heart. What began as respect has become something far deeper. I love you, Eleanor. Truly, completely, irrevocably." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Oh, Nicholas, I've been waiting for weeks to hear you say those words, terrified to speak them first, lest I seem foolish. I love you too with all my heart." He kissed her then deeply and thoroughly, pouring every emotion they'd both been holding back into that one perfect moment. When they finally separated, both were breathless and smiling. "It seems," Nicholas said with wonder in his voice, "our practical arrangement has become rather impractical after all." "Wonderfully impractical," Eleanor agreed, laughing through her happy tears. "Who would have thought a marriage begun to escape humiliation would lead to such profound happiness?" "Love has a way of surprising us," Nicholas replied, pulling her close again as the carriage carried them home through the softly falling snow. "Thank God I attended that damned engagement ball. Thank God I found the courage to intervene. Thank God you said yes." "Thank God indeed," Eleanor whispered, resting her head against his shoulder, her heart overflowing with gratitude and love. Their marriage, begun in scandal and hastily arranged, had blossomed into exactly what both had secretly hoped for, but neither dared expect a true union of hearts, minds, and souls. The humiliation that had seemed an ending had proven the beginning of their greatest blessing. And in the years that followed, as they built a life together filled with love, purpose, and partnership, both Nicholas and Eleanor often reflected on that fateful night when destiny intervened, transforming heartbreak into hope, and a duke's unexpected proposal into a love story for the ages. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, each raised with the values of education, compassion, and respect their parents shared. The Duchy of Thornfield schools became models of progressive educational reform, with Eleanor personally leading efforts to ensure all children, regardless of birth, had access to quality education. Nicholas continued his innovative business practices, but always with Eleanor at his side, his partner in every sense. She proved to possess a sharp mind for commerce, and many of their most successful investments resulted from her insights and counsel. As for Richard Ashworth, he eventually married a quiet heiress who tolerated his arrogance with tranquil resignation. Rumours occasionally reached London about his marital unhappiness, but Eleanor refused to extract any satisfaction from it. She'd learned that true happiness came not from triumph over others, but from building a life of meaning and love with someone who valued you completely. William visited frequently, becoming the children's favourite uncle and trusted counsellor to both Nicholas and Eleanor. He too eventually found his own love, marrying an intelligent young woman who shared his passion for social reform. Lady and Lord Blackwood, living comfortably under the allowance established by Nicholas's trust, gradually accepted that their daughter's scandalous choice had resulted in far greater happiness than any society-sanctioned union could have provided. Lady Blackwood particularly delighted in her grandchildren, often remarking how Eleanor had become a remarkable woman, though she always knew, of course, that her daughter possessed extraordinary strength. And Eleanor, now Duchess of Thornfield, woman of influence and mother of three, often paused in her busy days to reflect on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place of profound contentment. The girl who once sat resignedly before her mirror, preparing for a life of silent desperation, had transformed into a woman of purpose, power, and love. She'd learned that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disaster. That courage to choose your own path, even when it seems impossible, can lead to possibilities beyond your wildest dreams. And that true love, not the fairy tale kind, but the kind built on respect, honesty, and genuine partnership, was the greatest blessing of all. On one particular winter evening, many years after that fateful engagement ball, Eleanor stood with Nicholas on their mansion's terrace, watching snow fall softly over the gardens below. Their children played inside, their laughter floating through the open windows like music. "Do you ever regret it?" Nicholas asked, pulling her into his embrace. "The precipitous choice we made, the way we scandalized all of London." Eleanor looked at the man who had become her anchor, her partner, her true love. "Not for a single moment," she replied. "And you?" "Only," he said, smiling. "That smile that still made her heart race after all these years, that I didn't find you sooner." They stood together in the winter cold, warmed by the love they'd built and the life they'd created together. And as the snow continued falling, blanketing the world in white renewal, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that every difficult choice, every moment of doubt, every second of courage that had led to this moment had been completely worth it. For sometimes the greatest humiliation can lead to the greatest love, and sometimes the most unexpected duke can change your destiny in ways you'd never dare dream. The end. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 2,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, echoes of romance,